you to our next session. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And that is about the mobility challenges and opportunities of mega events. Think the Olympics, World Cup, big sporting events, big music events. Here, the Kingdom is preparing a number of ambitious mega events. And what is it about them that create opportunities and challenges? Well, you have a huge amount of investment in infrastructure that comes in a short window. How do we make sure that that investment is actually purposeful for the citizens of somewhere like Riyadh, for instance? Let's find out more now. I'm delighted to introduce you to Matthew Martin, who's the Saudi Bureau Chief of Semafor, and his distinguished guests. Matthew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us for this session. I think we're at the closing end of the day, but as you just heard in that introduction, and has been talked a lot about today, there is a huge demand now across Saudi Arabia for investment into hosting these huge events that the Kingdom has gone out and won over the past few years, and so this is going to obviously put a huge amount of burden in terms of investment in infrastructure and investment in mobility, but obviously also a huge opportunity. And so that's going to be the focus of our session today. So with me we have Helmut Scholze from Kearney and Waleed Shaalan, who is working in the Aseer region. And so to begin with, I thought I would just give them just an opportunity just to very quickly give us an introduction to who you are. Helmut, you start first. Who you are and what's your expertise in this space?
Thank you very much, Matthew. My name is Helmut Scholze. I'm a senior partner at Kearney in the Middle East and Africa office. I lead our mobility infrastructure. I have been here in the region over the past 18 years. Was supposed to be a 1 or 2 year stint, but it developed ever since. And I'd say I have the blessing that I was involved in a lot of projects that really created what's next, both in the mobility and infrastructure space. Some of the examples that I was very glad to work on is I've actually helped build up several railway systems in the region, developed also several mobility systems for bigger projects. I worked on various joint ventures, brought new technologies to the region, for example, in advanced air mobility. And also on the infrastructure side, I've been involved in developing master plans, commercial concepts, on the full real estate development perspective on many sites, districts, and even cities. So in that sense, it's a great pleasure to be here today for this conference that also brings together an aspect between mobility and urban planning, which is very important and not to be underestimated.
Yeah, and Waleed, tell us a bit about yourself, and also I've had a few conversations with people here who are making maybe their first or second trip to the Kingdom, and so they're perhaps not familiar with Aseer. So as well as telling us about yourself and in your role within the Aseer development, also tell us a bit about Aseer for those people who don't know about it and probably have a view that much of Saudi Arabia looks like Riyadh.
Good evening. My name is Waleed Shaalan. I am working in the Aseer Development Authority. My background is in architecture and urban design, and I'm leading design in the Aseer region. The Aseer region is Saudi's best kept secret. And we sometimes forget the scale of Saudi Arabia. Aseer is actually the size of Austria. And it is in the south with border on Yemen, 120-kilometer coast on the Red Sea. But it starts from sea level and it ascends up to 3,000 meters above sea level. And this diversity in the topography and climate results in a lot of richness, especially in the heritage, the vernacular architecture, and so forth, which makes it a very unique area to work and really a great place to visit, and hope you get a chance to come someday.
Well, as someone who has made a trip over to Apa and trekked the Suda mountain, I would recommend it to everyone if you get the opportunity to do so. Helmut, perhaps to start off with, As you mentioned in your introduction, you've been in the region a long time. I've been around about the same period of time as well, and so we've seen some of these events have already come to the region. We've obviously had Expo in Dubai. We have had World Cup in Qatar, and increasingly the region is playing a role in hosting these big events. There's talk about Olympic bids coming maybe at some point in the future from someone. But what are sort of the key learnings that you think that Saudi Arabia needs to be thinking about from the experiences in the region so far?
I think, maybe a few, 2-3 points that are interesting to understand the problem of that magnitude, and then going maybe into some of the learnings from past events here in the region, but also elsewhere. First of all, the important point is from a mobility perspective, if you have a mega event such as Olympic Games, the World Cup, or also Expo sites, which is a little bit more stretched, the Expos, but particularly sports events that happen usually in a time frame of 4 to 6 weeks, you have peak loads that are typically between 5 to 15 times as high as you normally have. And that is compared to the normal peak loads. So that means no system as such is built to be able to function with that. So you really need to think about very well upfront how you plan that. Yeah? So that is an important point. I think another point is also very important is that we often talk about the mobility on site. One crucial bottleneck, though, is often the air traffic. So Qatar has seen this, has had actually a significant spike. They had more than 500 planes landing every day. That was actually creating also quite some significant delays. That will be an aspect that will be most likely quite relevant for Riyadh because the majority of the stadiums are in Riyadh. I think more than 8, if I remember it correctly. So this is a massive concentration. So these points need to be well thought after. What also happens, it's a very important point, but people often underestimate the city, and particularly when we talk about Riyadh and Jeddah as the two host sites, a bit less in the Aseer region with Abba. The city itself is still there. So you need to do actually a dual planning. It's not just about the event. You also still need to run the rest of the city, which is actually much larger. Yeah. So that is often a topic which is a bit left aside. Freight also often is a bit thought after. People immediately think about transportation of people. Yeah, but the freight is even sometimes more important. So, and that also needs to be coordinated with the transport for the people. So smart schemes, for example, to have freight transport only during night hours, while you don't have games, etc. All these items are very important. And then maybe last but not least, one item also important is that, pedestrian flows often, and then the last mile of these events, this is where you really create typically the most bottlenecks, because that's where everything comes together, right? You have the pedestrians, you have the cars for logistics, you have all the flows for emergency. That's also another whole dimension of transportation that needs to be organized. All that together is creating also certain aspects. Yeah? So that's basically, I'd say, the situation.
Yeah. And so, Waleed, I guess you're now on the front lines of thinking about all of these issues, because not only as Aseer already have your own development plans, but now sort of added on top of that, you're going to be having a World Cup stadium.
That's correct. And in addition, we do have the same issues as you mentioned. You talked about peak hours. We already have an influx of tourism in the summer as the temperature doesn't go above 30 in Aseer. So you can imagine how many people in the rest of Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf would be coming. And that already creates conditions that we're dealing with. What do you do with the congestion in those peak hours, for example? The advantage of Aseer is that we already have a population of 2 million people, 200,000 in Abha, and the existing population and the existing infrastructure that's there is very much, it creates a brownfield condition so that when you start to put a World Cup stadium there, you're already putting it in an existing fabric. And it is also aligned with the direction of Aseer. Aseer is intending to be an all-year-round tourist destination. So already we were preparing for the airport. It wasn't done just for the World Cup, but the World Cup aligns with that and strengthens and pushes us forward. The site selected in the bid book for the World Cup was to actually put the stadium in the existing university. And by putting it in the university, it already has a legacy. because it will be part of the university life, graduation, concerts, university sports, etc. And then that becomes a catalyst to master planning the area around the university. And not only that, but it also gives it a direction, not just to create F&B outlets and hospitality to serve the event, but to think about the legacy of how that can be actually a sports hub, leveraging our high altitude and our climate. We're ideal situation to attract all year round training. Imagine cyclists who are training for the Tour de France in the winter in Europe when it's cold, they can come and train in the beautiful climate and the high altitude of Aseer and so forth. So what's very positive about the World Cup coming to Aseer is that it is actually strengthening and thrusting us forward in the direction where we're already going.
Yeah, and I wanted to just sort of ask on that point, I mean, how much, in terms of, developing your master plan and sort of vision for development, at what point does the World Cup come into that? Was it like, oh no, now we've got to add a stadium to this and start thinking about this, or was it sort of right from the beginning that it was there?
Oh, it was actually good news for us. Let's take Abha, for example. One of our projects now aims to create Abha Uplift. And uplifting the city of Abha, we're doing it on multiple fronts. One of the PIF projects is Al-Wadi project, which is an urban regeneration project of bringing in mixed use in the heart of the city. But rather than that being an isolated event, we are extending it to the rest of the city to uplift all of Abha and create a network of pedestrian areas. When the World Cup comes, we start to insert what will be the fan zones. We have 2 fan zones, and they are also designed to be part of the urban fabric. So after the World Cup, they become civic spaces. We've got 1 fan zone in front of the governance center, so it becomes almost the formal space. And we've got another fan zone which is on the ridge. And you will see that Aseer is very much defined by ridges and wadis. And we leverage that and bring it into the plan. So it becomes input, and it becomes very positive input, not just a catalyst. It's not really a problem. It's actually coming in as a solution. Yeah. So we don't have to really worry about legacy because we're already going there.
Yeah, and Helmut, on that legacy point, I mean, what's your advice to the planners in Saudi Arabia as they start thinking about, as you mentioned, there is this challenge that there's going to be short periods of time where you have a very large influx of people coming in, but you also, don't want to be left with unused infrastructure. So, what's your advice in terms of how the planners and decision makers should be thinking about these challenges?
Yeah, I think the example of ABBA is actually a very fascinating one, because that is really, truly where a World Cup can help, right? Where it's basically a catalyst for the urban development of a city, right? So simply because of the natural conditions. In the case of Riyadh, it will be a little bit different because, as I said, there's many stadia, so that will be, from a traffic perspective, obviously very important to manage. I think the core question when it comes to planning, and this is one of the key learnings, and I think planning is king and planning is key, is really the legacy that you want to create. You don't create a mobility system just for this site. You need to ensure that it tackles all the issues that I was speaking at the beginning. But when you think about what does the mobility system for Riyadh needs to look like in 2040 or 2050, and how do I actually leverage, or also in Jeddah, so how do I leverage that, in order and how do I leverage the Expo and the World Cup in order to create the right mobility system? So that means, particularly when we come to public transport, which is now also growing in Riyadh, and it's great to see how the bus network, the metro network are all evolving. That will be a very, very crucial component to think about how that can be further strengthened, right, in a way that it allows basically to cope with these issues. Yeah. One topic as such. One other topic which is also key, I think, it's not, people often think about the hard infrastructure. There's a lot of money spent on concrete, steel, and other items. I think a core point is also how much money do you invest actually in the digital infrastructure and the software, etc., because that is a key driver actually to solve a lot of these problems. We've seen many panels here before. And Carlo, for example, at the very beginning of the conference showed examples how you can manage flows, how you can manage crowds. Yeah, so that will be a very crucial aspect in a way to intelligently manage the traffic that comes on top, right, without having to build all this infrastructure. And that's the beauty of our age, right? So nowadays we have actually these means from a technological perspective, and that is really very crucial that this will be leveraged when we talk about planning.
Yeah.
You talked about the last mile, and I want to talk about what we're doing in our last mile for the stadium. The stadium being on the campus, we've actually launched a competition to do a campus in a park. And that was a group of international consultants, regional, and interestingly, we brought in a team of students from one of the universities with their professors to compete. And they ended up winning the design. The idea of the design is to be able to leverage this large area that the university occupies and layer it with a park that invites the public to engage and design it for micromobility. And then when the stadium comes in, it fits in beautifully in all of that. So as you start to develop hotels and areas around the plan, your last mile is already a beautiful park equipped with walkability, micromobility, and so forth. So it's really all working simultaneously. We're not viewing the World Cup as, you know, a problem that we need to solve. What are we going to do after? Not at all. This is actually complementing to what we're doing and strengthening what we're doing.
Yeah, and how are you thinking about the great development opportunity here? As I think we sort of alluded to earlier, is that you have a hard deadline to deliver something now. The challenge is you have a hard deadline to deliver something. So that's both, and obviously this focuses everybody's minds onto 2034, but it also is a very high pressure environment now to make sure that you meet that challenge. So how are you preparing the groundwork for that now, and making sure that everything comes in on time, and that as time advances and we get closer, that you don't start to compromise on some of the things that you've articulated about the beauty of the region, being able to develop these sort of last mile solutions as well, and get to a point where it's like, okay, well, it's 12 months, we need a hotel now.
Well, I think that we've all who studied architecture know the advantages of having a deadline. That's when you pull your all-nighter and you finish. So sometimes having a hard deadline is a good thing. The advantage, again, that we have in Aseer is that we have strong leadership with vision, and we have centralized planning and decentralized execution, and the ability to be able to plan properly. And that is a big advantage and gives us an edge to deal with that. So we are in a position, we don't feel that having a deadline is actually a negative thing. On the contrary, it's actually a positive thing, because then we can also link a lot of other things to that deadline and ensure that our development plan is delivered on time.
Yeah, and Helmut, one of the other themes I think of the day has been technology, and the role that is obviously transforming the way we all live our lives, and the way we move as well. As we get into dealing with the challenges of dealing with very large volumes of people in short periods of time, how can technology help solve some of those problems, and what are the sort of the key areas that people need to be focusing on?
I think the first point when it comes to the execution, right, and the hard deadlines and how we can use technologies to help us with that, is that you need to start as early as possible. And that is often, unfortunately, a problem that we've seen in the past, that sometimes then decisions take longer than expected, et cetera, and then you get later, and then at the end you try to buy your way out. But then the quality suffers and the cost explodes, et cetera. So that is, I mean, as always, you cannot start early enough. And in order to basically enable that, that's also already an area where when you think about intelligently, how can you use technology to bring together, for example, the different stakeholders, the different planning inputs, the different execution inputs. It's a key aspect that needs to be, where this can help, not only then in technical topics such as routing and later on, right? But right now at the stage where we need to ensure that everything is built and there in time. So that's a fundamental, I think, a bit underestimated use of technology, how I can actually build platforms centralized to monitor the progress across all stakeholders that really enforce almost inputs that are there in order that these decisions can be taken. Yeah, I've seen this unfortunately too many times in the kingdom sometimes, that then some decisions get delayed, and then at the end of the day, the construction starts too late, and then we have the problem at the end.
Yeah.
I think we always try to design for the future, but not be futuristic and not fall into the trap of just technology for technology's sake.
Yeah.
But we also want to be flexible enough and agile to be able to accommodate what the future brings. Specifically, we go back to the Abha uplift. And again, how do we transform a city that has such a great potential to be a walkable city? Because of the climate, the topography, all the conditions say this has to be a walkable city. But then again, the dominance of the car makes that very, very difficult. But now we start to, in our planning, look into creating mobility hubs. We start looking into autonomous vehicles, internal micro-mobilities, and plan for such solutions. How do we also take advantage of our beautiful resorts that are could be an hour or 2 hour drive from Abha city? Again, we start to plan for the idea of the air taxis and things in the future that can bring you closer. But at the same time, grounded in reality, but ready also for the future.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, for you in Aseer, this is a great opportunity to have sort of eyes all over the world suddenly on the region in a way that they perhaps wouldn't be, and so. Are you seeing this as also a sort of a marketing opportunity for the region on a global stage?
Yes, absolutely. But I think the fact that Aseer is so unique and is always a surprise. I mean, I'm talking not about my colleagues and friends who are living in the West. I'm talking about my friends who are in the Middle East. When they see pictures of Aseer, they think it's Lebanon. They're confused. They don't know this is Saudi Arabia. You see these beautiful, lush juniper forests and wildlife, and they can't believe it's in Saudi Arabia. So I think that Aseer by itself, with its colorful and rich heritage and culture and beautiful landscape, by itself will be a place where people want to bring back the feeling of discovery that we've lost in travel, because everywhere is overexposed on social media. You go to places, you've already seen everything before you arrive, and most likely you get disappointed because it doesn't match. The room is smaller than I thought. This is, But when you have an opportunity for such an element of discovery and surprise, it gives Aseer a big advantage that it almost doesn't need to be marketed.
Yes, and Helmut, one of the points you mentioned earlier on was these issues of sort of freight and the whole logistics transport as well, which I mean, if we look back at Doha, I mean, in some ways it was kind of easy for them because Qatar's a very small country. It has an established port network and all the logistics and infrastructure there. Saudi Arabia is a very big country. It's it's an entirely different story. You've got construction going on in very different places. You're going to have to bring materials into all of those places. You're going to have to bring a workforce into all of those places that perhaps might not be there. How big a challenge is that, and how do you get around those issues?
Yeah, I think so the Expo is in Riyadh. Yeah, the World Cup has 4 centers, more or less regional. You have Khobar, Aba, and then Jeddah and Riyadh. So that makes it already a bit easier than, for example, in other World Cups, like now in the US, Mexico, and Canada, where you literally are spread across two continents. Yeah, so if you take North and South America or Middle America, so that's much larger spread. So in that sense, that's the good news. I think the more challenging part is, as I said before, also there's so many projects ongoing that are not just only related to the Expo and at the World Cup, but you have also all the other work that is ongoing. So I mean, this country has seen an unprecedented transformation in the past years, and then it's still ongoing. That we set some the Vision 2030. It's just at the beginning stage of its implementation status. So this is really going to be the interesting aspect, how that can be managed all together in one flow. It's a bit similar to what I mentioned before. When the event is there, you'll not only have actually the spectators and visitors, you also have your citizens, right? And you also don't want to completely, have them out of the city. In Paris, for example, a lot of my friends actually, they all literally went out when the Olympics were, which was a little bit pity almost, because they all felt, oh my God, it's going to be so crowded. That ultimately, funny-wise, helped a bit because it was less traffic than expected. But it's not necessarily the way you want to do it.
Yes, yeah.
On the topic of freight, again, the World Cup Stadium will also help us accelerate some of the projects that we have in infrastructure. We have a highway that will take us down to the coast that will actually cut the time in half, and that's already ongoing. And having the World Cup again as a deadline gives us also the right tempo to make sure that that is complete, that it can provide the access and freight, as you mentioned, being an important part of it.
And I guess, the other thing for you in sort of hosting one of these and going through this development process is that, nobody wants to live on a building site. And so, managing the process and maintaining the quality of life in the city as it goes through this development also requires a huge amount of thoughtfulness and consideration. How are you planning to tackle those sorts of issues?
I think, again, it brings us back to our approach of centralized planning and decentralized execution. Our leadership, the chairman of the Aseer Development Authority is also the governor of the Aseer region. So that gives us the ability to really have the ability to effectively do centralized planning and decentralized execution.
Yeah. Helmut, as we briefly mentioned the legacy idea. What do you think will be the key challenge for Saudi Arabia as it looks at making sure that the investments in infrastructure are things that have sustainable legacies, and also there's a lot of coverage for every place whenever they host one of these big events as to is the net result positive for these economies, or do they spend more money on it than they end up making long term?
I think obviously, and there's so many examples of that, of some that went well, some that didn't go well. I mean, Barcelona versus Athens also, if you're internationally, right? So Barcelona is a beautiful example how that whole city all of a sudden thrived, literally. In Athens, it was a very, very costly exercise, so, and then maybe bring back that economic advantage. I think the good news is in a sense for the kingdom is that the need to invest into public transport infrastructure is there anyhow. So this is great that this is a further catalysator for that this will be done. Yeah? And it's also a bit of a different situation if you look then at the next level in terms of how will be the utilization of the assets after the events. In, let's say, Doha specifically, obviously is a very small city and country with 3.5 million residents. So yes, so the metro system built there, etc. I mean, right now, obviously, it might not be that utilized. Then it will maybe be in 20 years or so. Here, that will be different. Obviously, I think the core question will be a bit the legacy, and the legacy for the Expo side. I would also say that is already in the planning. What I can see from the master plans, there is very clear thoughts how that site itself can be used and also how the mobility systems can be used. I think the most interesting question from my side would be what will they do with all the stadia that they're going to build in Riyadh, because there's going to be 5 or 6 new stadia that's going to be built, and that's obviously a question, do you need that on a permanent basis, right? But from a let's say public transport perspective, building that up is in Riyadh, and with all the plans to grow that city to ultimately 13 million, that is almost, I mean, not so much of an issue.
Yeah. And Waleed, you've got a big airport development coming up for Aseer. I mean, can you tell us a bit about what's that going to mean for your capacity to be able to handle visitors, and what's the ambition for Aseer in terms of attracting tourists, and where are they coming from? Are they coming from Saudi Arabia? Will they be coming regionally or internationally, or all of the above?
I mean, Aseer region has an approved strategy, and we have also in the middle of working on our regional plan. And we have this advantage of working top, bottom, and bottom up. The ambition is for Aseer to be an all-year-round tourist destination, and the project of the airport was launched a couple of years ago as an international competition amongst top consultants. And when we received the designs, they were all rejected. They were great airports, but it was a piece of transportation infrastructure. But we don't want just transportation infrastructure. We want a gateway to Aseer, a sense of arrival when you look before you land outside of your window of your airplane, you look down and you say, wow, I've arrived in Aseer. So we ran the competition again. And Foster and partner, they won the first prize, and we were able to create an architectural language that reflect the identity, but also reflect the time. And at the same time, accommodate the volume of tourists that we are expecting, which we're targeting for 7 million in the airport. And that's the second airport in the Aseer region. We have another airport in Bisha, and we're also accessible by land. So there is current percentages of local tourism will also be increased, but we aim to attract international tourists by having this international airport and having direct flights that can come from different parts of the world.
Yeah. And how are you, is there any sort of technology on the horizon that you're particularly interested in seeing how it can help to revolutionize and change mobility in the region as well? I mean, we've wandering around the exhibition area, we've got electric taxis, takeoff and landing vehicles. I've just been to people who are doing, autonomous vehicles. Do these have a big role to play, do you think, in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, looking from the perspective, like we were discussing, that we don't work in silos. We work in very high level of collaboration. So when we have a mobility problem, it's not necessarily a mobility solution. It could be an urban planning solution. We could have a lot of congestion in the summertime where we have peak drivers, and rather than saying, okay, make the roads wider, we start to analyze what are these drivers and why are they out, and if you find that a lot of them are just going out to cruise, then we create nice pedestrian areas for them to walk around. So that could reduce the use of the cars, for example. Another thing that we're looking at now on one of the projects is the idea of having the autonomous vehicles being used via app. So, because part of our problem is not just the roads, but the parking. The parking eats up so much valuable space in the city that if we manage to keep the parking out of the city and keep those autonomous vehicles, even Ubers or anything that's shared mobility, that frees up a lot of sidewalk space, which very many cities don't even exist, the idea of a sidewalk. Everything is just from car to shop. There's no space outside. And that's what we aim to do, to be able to bring back that space for pedestrians and for the people and for the city.
Yeah. Helmut, what do you, as we look at the delivery timeline that we have over the next 8-9 years for getting to the World Cup, obviously shorter to get to Expo, what's the biggest worry and the thing that, when you speak to the decision makers and the policy makers here, that you want to make sure that they have at the top of their minds?
No, as we mentioned before, I think the key is to start as early as possible, right? The key is to streamline the decision making. The key is to bring in all relevant parties to one table, to have a very clear coordinated mechanism that allows you to bring in all the inputs. And as I said, for that purpose, technology can be a great driver. This is an aspect that, in terms of the whole setup, the governance setup as such, is quite important to keep in mind. I think another aspect, obviously, is also, that's what we mentioned before, there's a lot of other aspects also, there's a lot of other projects currently in the making. So it's also important to look at basically securing the supply capabilities. Yeah, that's generally a topic. which is for the stadia and for the expo side, should be sort of handleable, but there's a lot going on at the same time. So these are crucial aspects. We can, and there's obviously many others. I think the core point is basically that they really have also a realistic plan, yeah, and not just at the end and everything shuffled together. Plus, bringing in obviously also operators as early as possible, a key aspect as well that helps a lot during the planning stage, also to avoid ultimately certain corrections that you need to do then last minute, which then often ends up also in delays, etc.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Waleed, what keeps you up at night as you think about everything that will have to be achieved over the next decade?
Well, I think, of course, the issue of time. That's the big challenge, is how do you make sure that everything keeps going at the right tempo in order to reach the finish line, especially on things that have hard deadlines. That's usually what keeps me up at night. But I'm very confident that we are working with a steady pace, and we will get there and beyond, inshallah.
Yeah. Well, I think our time is also up for this session as well, so that was an appropriate note to end on. But so thank you very much, and yeah, please show your appreciation for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.